Up to you.
Very convenient way of chewing up the time, doesn't it?
Okay. To the world.
Fantastic. Well,
Right.
welcome everyone to the Politico Pub, and thank you very much for Pat McFadden, the Work and Pension Secretary, for coming and being our first on-stage event at the pub. This is first this weekend, yeah, and we've got a whole host of your colleagues coming later on. So this is much more like a real pub than pretty much anything I've seen at conference. We've got a dartboard, we've got the stuff on the walls, we've got an actual bar, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So this is called a round with, not a session with. It's not one of these 1 hour in conversation type things. We're looking for kind of a short, sharp chat, some fun stuff,
is that
some
a warning?
serious stuff. Yeah, I think
It's a
short
warning.
answers probably is a sensible thing. But that's what all journalists say to all politicians, isn't it? So
Okay.
do our
Yeah.
best. Yeah.
The pub looks great. I like it.
Yeah. So what drink have you got there, Pat? We'll start
I've
with.
got a Diet Coke, and the reason I've got a Diet Coke is I do dry conference in recent years. Now I've got a confession to make. No one's listening, are they?
No live stream. No.
I haven't always done dry conference in the past. As a younger man, probably burned a candle at both ends a little bit at conference, but no more. In recent years, this suits me better, so hence the Diet Coke.
Well,
otherwise, I'd be having a pint of Guinness in here.
What was your worst drunken conference mistake then?
Oh, I don't want to confess. I think they've turned on the live stream, so.
Okay, fine. Well, look, let's get through a bit of the interview now. You've just been moved to Work and Pensions in the last month. You've got a bit of a formidable CV. You're the former Shadow Chief Secretary. You were the campaign chief who helped win the election last year. You were the PM's sort of Whitehall enforcer as Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Now DWP. So your colleagues once called you, pardon my French, tighter than a duck's arse. Wes Streeting once said that if you say spending 3 times, he will apparate with a scythe. How much has the PM moved you into DWP to slash the welfare bill?
Well, I mean, I think that's because I was on the Shadow Treasury team as the Shadow Chief Secretary, and your job is to say no, really, a lot of the time. And it helps with people to say, I would do what you want, but those awful people on the Shadow Treasury team won't let me. So the move into DWP, it's a very exciting thing because it's such an important part of the country. I think our debate on it in the last year or two has all revolved around disability benefits, but the biggest thing it does is pays the state pension. Everything in DWP is big numbers. It spends over £300 billion a year, and the majority of that is on the state pension credit, associated pensioner benefits, and the other 45% is on the rest. So it's big numbers, millions of people. It's good to be there.
So I know you're not going to get into kind of the details of this stuff, but when we do talk about working age benefits, right, the difficult bit, if you like, the bit where you have said that too much is being spent and this kind of has to be brought under control, I think. Give me an idea, not of the detail, but just of the scale. So the party, struggled to get about £5.5 billion of cuts through this summer. Are we talking, what needs to come out of that budget? Are we talking that, double that, triple that?
I don't think picking a number and going for it that way is the best way to do this. I think we need to think about what the welfare state is for. And when the Prime Minister made his change at the reshuffle, it wasn't just the DWP as is. He told me he wanted to add skills to the brief of the department. And the reason he wanted to do that is the DWP has always done some labour market stuff, important labour market stuff, job centre work and so on. But adding skills, the idea behind that is to try and make the skills system face the labour market a bit more, face what employers need a bit more. So that W in the middle of the title, I think, is very important. And I think that the way that Westminster debates welfare reform as a purely budgetary issue is a bit one-dimensional. I'm not saying the budget doesn't matter and the budget pressures don't matter, they do. But the way through this is to get more people into work. I'm speaking to the conference tomorrow. I'll have more to say about that then. And I think I'm pretty confident from the discussions I've had that you'll hear more about that in other speeches too. Speeches from politicians far better known than me.
So a lot of the skills stuff is about young people, isn't it? About people who've just come out of school or uni who are NEETs, if you want to call it that. They've kind of fallen down a gap in something. How much, when it comes to, I know there's a lot of skills stuff going into that, but when it comes to the welfare budget, how much are you looking at changes there? I think there's been talk about changes to universal credit for under 22s, for example.
Well, when you go into a new department, it's a bit like one of those intensive language courses where you have to just get steeped in it completely. And I was steeped in 1 million PowerPoint slides. Well, it felt like 1 million, probably wasn't 1 million. All and everything from pensions to carers allowance to child poverty to all sorts of parts of the system. And one of the slides that really jumped out at me was what's going on with young people and mental health, and the number of young people who are now leaving education and going on to long-term sickness benefits with mental health conditions. Of the people claiming the health element of universal credit, 80% of them who are under the age of 25 do so declaring a mental health condition. So I think there's a big, big question for the country about what is happening here. Why are so many more young people reporting these mental health conditions? And what's the right policy response to that? And that, for me, has been one of the most striking things that I've learned about in the first few weeks of being in the department.
Do you take the line that some kind of conservative or reform politicians say that not all these mental health issues are necessarily, should be categorised as mental health issues?
Well, I'm not a doctor. I think most of them aren't either. And so I don't want to give diagnoses from sitting here or any other studio. For me, the question is really, what should the policy response to this be? Is it right that it be sickness benefits? Should it be more help with working? I'm interested in that and exploring that further. Because there's obviously a concern if a growing number of young people are going on to sickness benefits pretty quickly after they leave education. And I really believe in work. I think it gives people purpose and pride, and I don't want to diagnose anyone's condition, but I think it's really important that we emphasise the central importance and purpose of work. And as a person, a politician, I really believe in that, and I think it's good for people if they are able to do it.
You want to see those numbers come down?
I want to see more young people in work. We've got almost 1 million people not in education, employment or training. The proportion has gone up since COVID. It wasn't great before COVID. It was about 1 in 10. It's about 12.8% or something now. So it's going up, and I think we need to do something about that. And as I say, you'll hear more about that at conference over the next couple of days.
I'll ask you one more kind of welfare spending thing. This is purely hypothetical, of course. If the DWP were to suddenly spend another £3 billion on something, I can't imagine what that could be. It's your principle that that money would have to come out of somewhere else in the welfare budget?
Well, I think it's a broader budgetary issue. Let me answer it this way. Having been part of the former Shadow Treasury team, as we discussed at the beginning, we believe in saying how things are going to be funded. And if we are spending more on something, anything, we have to explain how it's going to be funded, and that's true of any budget or any fiscal event.
Are you sort of comfortable with that amount being spent on raising the two-child limit, which pretty much everyone thinks is going to happen now?
Well, look, we are ambitious about reducing child poverty. Obviously, we look at the impact and effect of different measures. But I do think that the whole government owns all the government's fiscal decisions. And I don't think it's right, really, for individual MPs or ministers to say, I'd love to spend X billions on that. And then when asked, how's it going to be funded, to say, well, that's a matter for the Chancellor.
So your colleagues have got it wrong on this?
It's a matter for all of us. There is collective responsibility there for a reason. And the Chancellor is the person who has the very difficult job of looking at all the different demands, all the different revenue resources, but she shouldn't do that job alone. It needs to be owned by all of us, and I think we owe her a bit of solidarity in the decisions that she's got to make.
Or woe betide all the backbenchers that might cross Fagan in the next few months?
No, not at all. We have a very good dialogue, and I understand that colleagues are coming from a good place. They want things to be done. They want injustices to be addressed. But the task of government is to decide these things in the round. If I could, I don't know how many people were in the hall for Anthony Albanese's speech a couple of hours ago. I thought it was wonderful, and in particular the last 6 or 7 minutes of the speech, where he talked about the history of the Labour Party in both the UK and Australia. And he said, in each country we had made a historic decision, not just to be forces of protest and placards, but to actually go into Parliament and take the responsibility of government. That isn't a small statement. It's a really profound understanding of the importance of that decision, and with it comes some pretty hard yards, because it's the easiest thing in the world to demand this, that and the next thing, or to denigrate things or tear them down. The Labour Party here and in Australia have adopted a different road, which is to aspire to the responsibilities that government brings. And that means on these budgetary decisions, you can't say yes to everything. And when you do say yes to something, you have to account for how it's going to be paid for.
I'm going to whip through some other things now.
Okay.
I want to talk about digital ID.
Right.
You're a friend of Tony Blair in the government. Has he talked to you about it?
Many times. He's a big fan of it, yeah.
Yeah, so you helped. Well, how big were you a force in sort of bringing this as a thing in the government?
Well, I went to Estonia about a month ago and looked at how they had used this for not years but decades, and I asked probably some very naive questions about how it worked, and they have just built their public services around this. So if you want to, for example, register your ownership of a car, you want to do your tax return, you want to really any public service, you have a PIN number, you go in and you do it, and it's right through life. They've been doing it for years. It's their natural way to go. And when I told them, well, in the UK, what we're really fond of to prove our identity is searching in a drawer to try and find a tatty council tax bill to prove it, they thought that was a little bit quaint.
How do you want to use it in the benefit system? Just
well, I think
briefly.
What
would people actually need it for?
I think, well, it's to prove identity. So it could have applications on fraud, for example. Are you still in the country? Are you entitled to the things that you said you were when you were in the country? So I think we do want to explore this. What is it at the end of the day? It is a digital expression of the other forms of identity that we have, whether that's a passport or a driving license. And we're moving towards digital driving licenses anyway, so we're going to have something quite like this in our phones quite soon. And I think that the potential for convenience for people in accessing public services is really high. So, you know, I think the Prime Minister's absolutely right to ask us to do the work on this. I hope to be part of that work, and for all the different departments in government who could make a better public service offer to the public through this to do it. And I think after it had come in and it had been in operation for a while, we'd probably end up wondering what all the fuss was about.
Move on briefly to some politics. You were the one behind that landslide victory last year, or one of the people in HQ. How do you think it's going?
I think it's we're doing a lot of good things. I was very honoured to be asked to be the campaign coordinator. And one of the things that strikes me about the debate in the last number of months is people perhaps underestimate how rare Labour victories have been. They don't fall from the sky. They're hard won, and they're hard won, and they only happen when leaders have got the courage to take the right decisions and to win people's trust. It isn't just a matter of publishing a manifesto and saying, vote for me. There's an underlying, when the voters are taking a look at a political party, especially the prospect of putting a government out and putting an opposition party in, they ask themselves, can I trust these people? And you know, are they fit for the job? And I think Keir deserves far more credit than he's getting for winning that trust and completing that task. So here we are, a year in. I could go through a list of things, which you'll hear this weekend, and I'm happy to.
Okay.
Happy to do that. It's okay, yeah. And I think every day we see the government doing good things. Let me just do two from this week while we're here. I can't say that without mentioning nothing. So the money for towns all over the country, like my constituency, which have felt forgotten for a long time. There was a whole list of places announced the other day. I think that can make a real difference, and it's going to be community-led. The second thing, the package of support that we announced and Peter Kyle announced last night for Jaguar Land Rover supply chain makes a huge difference to a region like mine in the West Midlands. I'm a Wolverhampton MP, and day by day you see a government willing to step up and address problems. And of course, we've got to tell the story of all that and get all that over, but I see a government that's doing good things every day, and I think you're going to hear a lot more about what we want to do in the next few days over the conference.
The community funding has obviously the stamp of Morgan McSweeney, a great ally of yours. In number 10, you said this week is very talented.
Yeah.
He's been under fire lately. Why do you think people dislike him?
Well, I don't know if you remember a time long ago when the political world was obsessed by people called spin doctors. Do you remember spin doctors?
I think we still are at Politico.
Are they, a spin doctor still a thing?
Yeah, of course.
Are they still
I
a
think
thing?
yours is in this anyway.
So they were obsessed by spin doctors, and of course the most well-known so-called spin doctor was Alistair Campbell, and the Tories were attacking him for being a spin doctor mainly, and Nicholas Soames popped up and said, look, rather than attacking him, maybe we on the Tory side should be trying to find someone as good as him. And I think that the attacks on Morgan are in part because he's good and he's effective, and our opponents would rather he wasn't there.
Another ally of yours is Peter Mandelson. Do you think he'll rise again?
I'm not sure. I've got much to add to that. You know, the Prime Minister's made a decision. The outcome has been done, and we're going to have to move on, find a new ambassador, and go on from there.
It sounds like you're not ruling it out one day, hey? I suppose we never can. I'll just finish with some quick fire then. I don't know, do we have time for a quick roving mic with one or two questions? Yeah? Right. Favourite Springsteen song?
Oh, God. We could be here all night.
No, please.
We could prove it all night. it's very, very hard to pick one. I think I went to see him in this city on June the 7th this year when Paul McCartney appeared on stage. And the tour was called the Land of Hope and Dreams Tour. And I've always thought Land of Hope and Dreams was a fantastic song because of this notion that Bruce Springsteen had of just travelling on a journey. You don't know where you're going, but you know you won't be back. And
Is that a metaphor? Or?
It's a great, there's so many wonderful songs, but if you ask me to pick one, you'd struggle to find a better one than that. It's a wonderful sort of gospel-influenced anthem. I think it's fantastic.
That was very profound, so I feel bad about the next question. Tenets or Buckfast?
Tenets.
Who's more important, Darren Jones or Pat McFadden?
We are collective responsibility.
Nigel Farage or Andy Burnham?
Who's more important?
No, who's your favourite?
Oh, Andy Burnham.
Tony Blair or Keir Starmer?
I get asked that one every time. You got no imagination. And the stock answer is, I've been very fortunate to work with two talented people from quite different political times.
Oh, well, we tried. Are there any questions for a quick roving mic? We have Sam Coates, who has bolted up. So let's
He's
take
not
him
an ordinary member of the public.
We've smuggled him in.
Thank you, Pat McFadden. You talked about the very big importance of being able to say how you fund things that you promised to do. How are you funding the winter fuel U-turn?
Through the stability of the economy, which we ensured. As the Chancellor explained at the time.
I mean, that's not an answer. Because you do have things that you don't fund, and then you do have things that you choose to fund. But it's pick and mix. You've got massive black holes in this budget. How can you sit there and say you fund everything when you quite clearly don't?
Well, there is, of course, public borrowing in the system. And the sources of the government's money are, in the end, the taxes they raise and the borrowing they choose to have. The Chancellor has set out her fiscal rules on how those things can be done in terms of borrowing for investment. I think that can be a good investment for the country. And I think the investments that we are funding through that are a really big contrast to the plans that we inherited. So what I'm saying is we'll always explain how things are funded, and that's what's done at every fiscal event.
It must really annoy you that the triple lock takes up so much of that funding.
Everything's a choice, and we made a choice to protect the triple lock, and we're doing it.
Any more for the roving mic? Yes, back there.
Hello, I'm Charlie from the British Beer and Pub Association, so thank you very much for putting this on as well. A large part of our workforce is 16 to 24-year-olds. Just wanted to hear your perspective on why it's important for young people to get into hospitality and specifically beer and pub work.
I think most people probably work in the hospitality industry at one point in their life. I spent some time as a dishwasher in a Mexican restaurant called Viva Mexico in Coburn Street in Edinburgh, a job I inherited from one John Swinney, who had been the dishwasher before I worked there. So I think these jobs are a really good early entry into the labour market for a lot of young people. And of course, as you'll be aware, if anyone hires somebody under the age of 21, there are no employers' national insurance contributions at all unless that person is earning more than 50,000 a year. So there's an incentive to hire young people there as a first job.
I think there was a national insurance rise at some point, wasn't there? Employers?
Well, I don't think the under-21's position is well enough known. There we are. But maybe now.
We've got a couple more roving mic questions. Let's go for this at the front. Is it about pubs again?
No.
Okay, good.
It is about hospitality, though, because I'm from McDonald's. So I thought I'd follow up that question about... Look, you talked really positively about youth opportunity and the role that the sector plays. The sector's feeling pretty bruised, given nearly 100,000 job losses across the sector for young people There's real concern about what's going to happen in the budget or what's coming through the Employment Rights Bill over the next 2 or 3 years. Just really question for you about how you're going to work with the sector to sort of reassure our franchisees and those across the sector to make sure those opportunities are still around in the future.
Well, look, I mentioned the national insurance break for under 21s. I think McDonald's is interesting. We've got local McDonald's franchises, of course, in my constituency, like probably in nearly every constituency. And I asked the owner of a franchise, well, he asked me, he said, guess how many jobs are in this one McDonald's franchise? I don't know how many, you probably know, but the rest of the audience, it was 200 jobs, because most of them were part-time and shift work and so on. So it generates a lot of work. On the Employment Rights Act, look, let me say this. We're the Labour Party. We've always believed that people should have decent rights at work. And quite often, I've found that when we've argued that, people will say it's going to be bad for jobs. That's what people said when the national minimum wage was brought in. It didn't prove to be the case. And I don't think we're asking for too much for people to have decent, predictable hours of work, to be decently paid for what they do, and to try to have some fair rights. You would expect a Labour government to do that, and that's what we're doing.
I think we've got time for one more. Yes, the lady over there.
Hi, I'm Rhiannon from PA. We've heard a lot about reform this conference already, and a lot of the language has been quite defensive, I think we could say. Are you scared of reform? Why do you keep giving them such a platform on when it's like it's meant to be the Labour Party promoting their message?
Well, you'll get plenty of promotion of our message. I gave you a little hint of what I'm expecting in terms of opportunities for young people in some of the speeches over the next couple of days. But look, I was the campaign coordinator for the last election, and I think one of the mistakes that's sometimes made in politics is to perfectly refight the last war. And I could see at the time of the last election that the terrain was shifting. You referred to Tony Blair a few minutes ago. A few days after the election, I went to that thing he organises, I forget what it's called, they call it Glastonbury for Centrists or whatever it is, that thing in central London. And I was in...
Centrist Dad Conference, I think.
It's the
Centrist
Dad Conference, right, I was there. And I was interviewed by John Sopel on the stage, a bit like this. And I said, the next election will be very different because our opponent on the right is going to be a very different one from a traditional Conservative party. I think that Rishi Sunak campaign felt to me like the end of an era for the Conservatives. Now, I couldn't have predicted 14, 15 months ago exactly what the balance would be between Reform and the Conservatives in that changing picture. And I'm not sure I can predict that exactly today, because today, the next election's a few years away. So I think it's important to show an awareness that the terrain is changing. So I make no apology for us recognising that the terrain has changed, and that's why we'll talk about that party and some of the mistakes they've made, and I think they've made a couple of big ones recently.
It's not just about mistakes, though. You're making a moral case now. So you've got the Prime Minister saying for the first time today, really, that a big reform policy is racist. Are you not worried that despite the clarification that Keir Starmer said, that people who want to vote for reform are going to look at that and they're going to see that he's calling them racist?
No, I think that's a willful distortion of what he was saying, and I think the people who are saying that know what they're doing. It's a very different thing. What he's pointing out is that if you go to people who've been here legally, didn't come here illegally, worked here legally, paid their taxes, got their indefinite leave to remain, that to then come along and say, we're going to rip all that up and we may threaten to deport you, that is not the way this country does things. And so I think he's quite right to call that out.
Well, on that happy note, I think we're at time. Thank you very much, Pat McFadden, for coming in. Cheers. did one of because quite small.
We start?
Well, I think we're live. So, hello again, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. We are live again at the Politico Pub. Gather round if you can, because we everyone bunched up the back last time, so you have to be a bit more friendly this time and come down. It's all right. He's not Pat McFadden. He can't hurt you.
I've never hurt anybody yet,
Yeah.
as far as I know.
So we are here in the Politico Pub on the first night. It does actually look like an actual pub. We have lights. Is that a chandelier? No.
Yeah, it's a chandelier.
It's a chandelier. Why not?
Of course it is.
We have a Houses of Parliament division bell, because it says Houses of Parliament division bell. Does it actually go off?
Yes.
When we have it?
the heads are
Why
nodding.
not? Yeah,
Heads
sure.
are nodding.
We have a dartboard. We had the football on earlier, and of course we have a free-flowing amount of free beer. And we have Jack Blanchard, who is over here from the US.
Hello. Thank you. I've never done an event in a pub, I don't think, before. This is great fun. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, we had to get you all the way back to Britain to do it. So,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and I do have a beautiful suit and gorgeous shoes that my airline has lost somewhere over the Atlantic, which is why I'm here in dressed down American style rather than good British tailoring. Can only apologise for that. It may turn up at some point during the interview, perhaps.
Well, for an American tech executive, you are right at home.
Yes,
so,
exactly, exactly.
Jack, of course, was the founder of London Playbook 8 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
Did the Burning the Midnight Oil and Much Worse for 3 years. Did many other things and went over to DC. About nearly a year ago now, right? January, I think it was.
Yes, my first day was January the 20th, which was President Trump's inauguration day.
Fantastic.
So it's been a quiet news cycle since then for me. Yeah. And I write the DC version of Playbook 4 mornings a week over there, which has been a experience, as you can imagine. I've been a journalist in the UK for 20 years before that. This is the first time I've worked dedicated in the US. So it's been eye-opening to see how that's worked so far.
So I have not many questions, but one of them is, can you just tell us what's actually going on in Washington? Like, what is it actually like over there?
I mean, it's insane, right? I mean, of course. I mean, Washington has never seen anything like what's happened to it over the last 8 or 9 months. The city feels almost in a state of shell shock sometimes, particularly at the start when Elon was in the White House and he was axing away big parts of government and they were disappearing overnight. Thousands of people were thinking they were losing their jobs overnight. Never quite clear how many of them really lost their jobs or not, but it certainly felt like that at the time. And the thing that you don't realise about DC, if you're over here in Britain, is that it's really a one-industry town. It's like an old coal mine town or something. Everyone works in the same game. And so when something like that happens, it reverberates through the city. And then, of course, on top of that, we had what happened in the summer when they sent the troops in. And again, it's added an extra level of, how can I put it, pizzazz to the city, if you like. It feels like a city in a slight sense of turmoil, which, of course, is difficult for lots of people living there, but absolutely fascinating if you're a journalist there to cover it, and especially one who's come from outside like I have, and you get a slightly different perspective to if you've been covering DC for 20, 30 years like some of my colleagues have.
I was going to say, what's it like coming in and starting on inauguration day and only getting the after and not the before picture, where like you sort of, all these people are like shell-shocked and trying to work out what's going on, and you're like, this is just what the world is like.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we all follow American politics anyway, right? So you're never really coming to American politics cold. I've been a student of American politics my whole life, really. But it's still different once you're parachuted right into it and you're seeing it up close. And yeah, it's certainly, we're very conscious that this is, you're there at a very, not just interesting time, but historic time, not just for DC, but for America. This is clearly one of the most consequential presidencies, modern history, maybe in all of history, and that's very apparent when you're there and you're dealing with it up close on a day-to-day level. Jaws drop in DC every day, just like they drop over here when you see what's happened next or what the president's doing now. Like, it's so much of it is unprecedented, so much of it feels historic and important, and you're very conscious of that as a journalist, just like you would be as a punter watching on TV.
What's it like, trying to write a morning newsletter where the president can just tear it up, shall we say.
He does that. He does that. He goes on his social media at bedtime and just breaks the news cycle at midnight with his thumbs, and you have to start again. And that's all part of the magic of covering Donald Trump's White House. I mean, when I was doing Playbook over here in London, Donald Trump was president then. It was like 2017, 18, those years. It was during his first term. And he used to do it to me then. I mean, you know, I remember him, you know, going after Theresa May once in the middle of the night, and you're like, okay, delete everything, let's start again, the world's just gone crazy. That happens all the time to me now, and that's just part of the fun. The flip side to that is there's never nothing to write about. There's never a boring day. You're never there going, oh, what am I going to put in Playbook this morning? It's like, what am I going to leave out of Playbook this morning? Because so many of these different storylines feel so consequential and so unusual and so fascinating to our audience that you've got to write about them, you know?
And how much is it? Because from over here, right, it looks completely like the cult of Donald, because that is the, you know, we see everything through what the president is doing with his thumbs or with his like 90-minute press conferences or whatever. Like, is it like that over in Washington as well? Like, or is there kind of more of a movement building beyond it, the MAGA movement, if you like, where it's kind of devolving past just being the president?
It's still, a lot of it is still him. He's such a magnet for attention. He's such a magnet for news, and he's in the way that he delivers news and the way he puts himself at the front of centre of every story, whether it's a massive policy announcement that he'll just make off the cuff, sitting in a press conference that wasn't even meant to happen, but he's just decided to invite the press in again for the third time that day. Or whether it's some corporate row about some company changing its logo. No, the president's just going to wade into that as well, and suddenly that's a political story, and I'm having to learn about this, you know, this company and why this is a really significant cultural issue he's decided to take up. So it's very hard to get away from, and traditionally in America, I mean, constitutionally in America, there are 3 co-equal branches of government. We don't feel like that at the moment. You know, Congress has essentially cleared the pitch for him. He has it completely under control. That's never really happened before. And the Supreme Court is much more independent than liberals would give it credit for, but nevertheless is allowing him to do much more than has happened in the past. And so he is this enormous presence across all types of story. And there is a huge MAGA movement underneath, and they have huge media characters who in their own bubble are enormous figures, but nothing comes close to Trump, nothing.
Who does it better, do you think, in the old press conference style? You've got one extreme, shall we say, you've got Donald Trump, and then maybe at the other you have Keir Starmer.
Yeah, it's weird that, isn't it? The one thing I was sure about when Donald Trump won the election is that relationship is going to be a complete disaster. Like, these two people are so different in every way. Like, you know what Keir's like, you know, straightforward guy, but, you know, very understated, very managerial. We all know it. You know what Donald Trump's like. They are polar opposites. I was like, that is going to be a car crash. And the journalist in me is like, sweet, that's going to be really interesting to watch how that happens. And in fact, Starmer, and I'm not just saying that because he was in the pub before watching the football, he's handled it incredibly well. It's one of the biggest achievements, I would say, of his premiership so far. As a journalist, to answer your actual question, Donald Trump every time, because Donald Trump does media every single day. There is no world leader who is more accessible than Donald Trump. Nowhere on the planet, not even the smallest country, has a leader who pop up and do essentially a press conference every single day in his office. And Donald Trump does that. You know, there was a week when he didn't do any media for like 6 days. The internet thought he died. It genuinely thought he died because he did nearly a week without doing any media. It's like, you should see my country. The Prime Minister will disappear for months. And like, that's normal. He just loves it. And for all the criticism that he gets, some of it rightly, for the way he deals with the media, that is, I think, really impressive. And especially, to be blunt, you know, he's not the youngest guy. The energy level to take that on every day is extraordinary. And obviously, as a journalist, you appreciate it because he gets asked the difficult questions every single day, and he's quite happy to answer them in his aggressive, robust, sometimes quite unpleasant to the journalist, but, you know, who cares? We're not all as thin-skinned as some. Like, he's there, and he's taking it. And
I was going to say, he's not that accessible to the AP or the various journalists he's banned for, you know, doing nasty things in his video.
They did a particular thing with AP that was, in my view, deeply wrong, but it wasn't like he banned the rest of the press pack. He was still taking those questions every day, and AP are now back in the room.
Yeah. So is there a concept in DC of like Britain having done well? You know, like you say, like Keir Starmer's done really well, or do they just kind of not really notice us because we're this little island? Like, where does it sit?
Definitely, they notice less than you realise when you're in the UK covering it, that's for sure. But you've got to appreciate, the domestic stories there are so big and so new and so important to people in America. They haven't really got the capacity to be spending too much time thinking about other countries and how their relationships are with the president, because he's just sent the troops into here, or he's just decided he's going to get this talk show host taken. I mean, you can imagine, people's capacity for all different levels of story is limited and finite. That said, for people that do follow that stuff, absolutely appreciated that Keir Starmer has done a very good job of befriending the president. And even when Elon Musk, who really took against Keir Starmer in quite an unpleasant way and was daily going after him, if you remember that period early in the presidency, and Elon Musk at that time was very close to the president, Trump just ignored him. And when he'd frequently get asked the question, what do you think about, what Elon said about Starmer, he'd always say, I really like Keir Starmer. And I think that's, I guess, testament to Starmer, also to a degree to Peter Mandelson, RIP. And I think, probably the Prime Minister should get credit for that.
How do you think it's going to end? Because, I mean, it's impressive in itself, isn't it, that this has lasted 9 months without crashing and burning, right? Do you think it does crash and burn, or do you think he'll be able to, keep it up?
I don't see what crashing and burning would look like, to be honest. I mean, there's no mechanism where, you can see the Prime Minister's under pressure here. People talk about, will he last till the next election? Obviously, I don't know, but, mechanisms happen here. Prime Ministers are forced out. We saw it enough with the Tories. That doesn't happen. And he has such control over the power centres in DC that, no, I don't see how would he crash and burn. What would that really mean? He's very popular with his own supporters. He hasn't got another election to win after this, and he's delivering almost everything that he promised he was going to do.
I mean, the Keir relationship, does that crash and burn?
That?
Yeah.
It's very hard to say with Donald Trump. He does dramatically fall out with people sometimes. Of course, we've seen that with Elon Musk, but I don't think so at the moment. He's never even questioned it. He really likes the guy. He's bought the Keir juice. So I don't think there's any evidence at all that would happen. I guess that, as we get closer to a British election, if Nigel Farage is still the prime candidate going up against Keir Starmer, and that Trump-Farage relationship is real, obviously that brings a different dynamic into it, and I suppose it's possible that it would start to change then, but that feels like a long way off, and I just don't really think Donald Trump cares that much about who wins the next UK election anyway. Why would he?
Actually, what do you make of what's going on in the UK? When you left the UK, things were sort of going along. There were a couple of number 10 scandals. I think the Sue Gray she probably was out by the time you left, and there were a few problems, but now you've come back and they're this far behind in the polls, and you've got talk about replacing the PM and all this stuff. What's a new American's eye view of this thing?
Well, it's sort of not the rise of a populist right movement in the shape of reform is kind of the least surprising thing that's ever happened if you just took one step back and watched it happening everywhere around the world. The idea that somehow Britain would be immune to what is obviously a massive political force that is not bound by one nation didn't make any sense. So, and Nigel Farage is an incredibly talented politician, as we've seen, very effective politician. It's, if you take two steps back, of course that would happen. It's surprising to see Labour apparently struggling as much as they are, although it was pretty obvious, I was here at the time, that they didn't have a very serious plan for government when they won the election, and that has obviously proved to be pretty disastrous. But I think the bigger themes are very familiar to me. It's not just America, you look at Europe as well, governments like this are getting panned, and parties like Reform are doing really well. And so I think, if you look at the big picture, it just feels like what's happening everywhere.
I think Pat McFadden just now talked about the old centrist ad conference. There was a big kind of get-together of Democrats and centre-left governments and stuff on Friday. How are the Democrats doing? Do you ever hear from them these days? What's the deal with them?
They're in a total mess. There is a huge amount of anger towards Donald Trump for people that don't like him and are liberally minded, would-be Democrat voters. But the party, much as we've sometimes seen when political parties here have suffered a really bad defeat, Not that the numbers were that bad, but it's been catastrophic for them, clearly what's happened. They're in a moment of disarray. The difference over there to British politics that is very striking to me is that there's no mechanism, there's no leader of the opposition, right? After you lose, it's not like here where there'd be a leadership contest and by now, the Democrats, if they were British, they'd have a new leader, setting a direction, like making decisions about, yes, we're going to oppose Trump on this, no, we're not going to let the government shut down, yes, we're going on this policy. Like, that's what a leader of the opposition does. They don't have that in America. So it's a very disunified picture, and if you want to know what the Democrats think about something, who do you ask? I don't know. And you could ask 10 people and they'll give you 10 different things what the Democrats think. And that's not a problem specific to them or to this moment. It's a structural part of American politics. But it's very difficult then for a party in this position to sound like they're automatically unified and they speak with one voice, and which is what the Liberals want. Is they want a leader to be fighting Donald Trump, and that structure doesn't exist in American politics, and that's making it one of the things that's making it very hard for them.
Yeah, we were talking to people in Labour who have exactly this problem. They don't know who to talk to. They're going on these delegations to DC and kind of meeting a whole spread bet of people just in case one of them might become president in 2028. But I mean, if we are putting bets on, or something less kind of financial, like, who are we supposed to be looking out for?
Yeah,
who are your names? Who are your picks?
Don't put any bets on. Like, you cannot. The idea you could predict who's going to be the Democratic candidate this far out is for the birds. No one would have thought in 2013 as we'd be that like Donald Trump was going to be the Republican Party candidate in 2016 and win the presidency. Like, these things are much slower burn than that. So we have early front runners, but I couldn't dream of saying that they'll still be the front runners come the primaries. And the primary system itself is very has a geographical aspect to it. The order that they pick makes a big difference. Momentum happens in ways that you wouldn't have expected. So I wouldn't dream of betting on that. All I would say is, we do have some front runners, and Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, has put himself in a position where he is been able to position himself as the voice of resistance to Trump, such as there is one, partly by virtue of Trump having targeted California first for his military incursion, and that helps Newsom to fight back. Partly he has a very effective social media strategy, which none of the others do. Well, that's not true. He has his own one, which has gathered attention. I don't think he's really going to get picked to be the candidate. He has lots of baggage and issues that vary for various reasons. But right now, if you're looking for someone who's standing up and fighting back, if you're a Democrat, and that is what they're desperate for, he is perceived to be doing that, and some of the others not as effectively yet. But like I say, it's far too early to say.
I won't run down to the betting shop.
No.
Do we have a roving mic for Jack, for anyone who wants to ask him any questions about America or other? Don't all shout at once. While people think, I'll ask you, what do you think is going to happen with the midterms?
Well, the midterms is really interesting because the math of that, see, I'm learning.
You're not allowed to do that. You can't do that.
Means that it should be relatively straightforward for the Democrats to win back the House, and it should be very, very difficult for the Democrats to win back the Senate. And that is due to the way that it works, the different districts that happen to be up for election and so on in the Senate, and means that is the most likely, and has always been the most likely outcome. Donald Trump is using gerrymandering to try and avoid that from happening overtly, just plain as in plain sight. The Democrats are now trying to do the same because they're trying to combat it. Extraordinary to my eyes in itself, but that's how it works. I still think it is the most likely scenario that they'll win back the House and not the Senate, but the speed of the news cycle there is so fast. Things change so quickly. So much will happen just between now and the end of the year, let alone through next year. That is a difficult call to make at this point, but that is definitely logically the most likely scenario.
Oh, thank you. Have we got any questions? Go on. Yes, we've got one at the back.
I'm afraid it's one of your colleagues. Really interested in, we always hear that the UK doesn't really feature in the kind of minds of US lawmakers, but how much of a character is Nigel Farage? He sort of paints himself as the great mate of Donald Trump.
That's a really good question. He is like, people know who he is in DC. He is definitely a character in DC. The relationship with Trump is absolutely real. So I think it's not overplayed by him. It's a real thing. There's obviously a limit to how much influence he has over Trump's thinking, or you would not see Donald Trump being so close with the Prime Minister, as I was just talking about. So it's not like he, or honestly anyone, has a huge amount of sway over Trump's thinking, but it's definitely a long-standing, strong relationship. Trump values loyalty so much. Farage stood by him through some of his most difficult moments, campaigned for him in 2016 when it was a less fashionable thing to do on the right, and Trump values and remembers that. And the links between the White House and the broad reform project are growing and fascinating to me. I was at a GB News launch event in DC earlier this month, where they opened a bureau there, and Farage was speaking at that, and the White House fully bought into it, sent half the cabinet down. Caroline Levitt, the president's press secretary, was on stage speaking, as were members of the cabinet. Farage was introduced as Britain's next prime minister, and you could see, like I say, it wasn't a reform event, it was a GB News event, but obviously, you know, he works there, right? So like, the ties were real, and you could see bonds being built, and clearly the White House had decided to put its weight behind this venture. That to me was really interesting, and I think that is something that is going to be worth watching over the next few years, and maybe, you know, even more closely after 2029, depending on how that goes. But you know, that is definitely a real thing, and if I was still in Britain, I would be watching that just as closely as I am over there.
Yeah, because there's also this reformy think tank. They're called the Centre for a Better Britain, and they're sort of going off and seeking MAGA funding in DC. They're trying to get their money into the coffers, and then they'll influence reform policy and all that sort of thing. So is there a lot of not just the big characters like Farage and Trump, like all the backroom fixers are talking to each other and stuff too?
Some of them definitely are, and I don't know about the group you're describing, but I could imagine that working. Because there's a lot of money in politics in DC, and there's a lot of love on the MAGA right for what broadly that Farage's project is over here, and so I wouldn't be surprised to see that as successful.
There was this idea going round maybe a year and a half ago, that Farage was out of favour, you know, Trump wouldn't talk to him, that he was sort of sitting away from him in the rallies and stuff. That seems to have gone away, right?
I think, was that a British idea?
Possibly, and maybe not all British ideas are right.
The British coverage of Britain and America is often overestimates how much Americans give a shit, honestly. Like, that's one of the things that you realise when you get there. I remember there were a lot of stories when Mandelson was nominated that, Trump was going to step in and block this guy. It's like the idea that Donald Trump really knew or cared who was going to be the ambassador to Washington when he'd just come back into the White House, and he was busy scything up the government and doing all these incredible things all at once, and he's going to be spending his time thinking about Peter Mandelson's, it's just, but over here it was a story every day, and always, they're definitely going to block it, and it's it just wasn't on the radar, and it was not in the conversation, and why would it be? And so I think, there's an element of that in a lot of these stories.
Well, if you believe Donald Trump, he's never met Peter Mandelson in his life,
there you
apparently.
Go.
So,
I saw them on TV together.
I think he stood over his shoulder and they praised the beautiful accent. Has anyone praised your beautiful accent?
You do get a lot of comments about your accent. Yes, you do actually. Americans are quite obsessed with British accents. People think that you're clever, which is great, and they enjoy hearing you speak, even if you're from Stockport. And no one's ever praised the Stockport accent before. So it's actually quite a tool if you're a journalist over there.
Excellent. Well, Jack, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you for having me. Isn't this awesome? I've been at Politico such a long time, and I remember when it was Kate and me and Annabelle and one or two other people, and it was we would struggle. We'd have an event in a tiny little pub miles away from conference. To see us create, I've never seen anything like this in conference before. To see us build our own pub and have Prime Minister in here watching football. I mean, it's this is fun. I'm going to be in here all night.
Excellent.
But I'm not working tonight. So.
I don't know what time it shuts. What time does
When's
it shut?
the last orders, guys?
Yeah. 9:30.
We'll probably get a few in, can't we?
Yeah. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks all. Thanks for coming. Do stick around. All right.
We are live. Please do not swear. Come round. Thank you very much. Once again, I'm Dan Bloom, a political editor at Politico, but you've had quite enough of me tonight. We are handing over to Anne McElvoy, my colleague, executive editor at Politico, and Sam Coates, deputy political editor at Sky News, for a live version of the Politics at Sam and Anne's podcast. So,
bring it on! That's great. You've done your bit now. Thank you very much, Dan. Yes, hi, I am, and welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne Live, the in-person pub interactive edition of the podcast that gives you everything you need to know about British politics in a timely manner.
She's Anne McElvoy. I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Look, it's a total pleasure to be here. Thank you very much indeed to Politico for having us, because normally we have a very, very different view of each other. It's the weirdest product you could ever imagine doing this podcast. I normally peer at Anne down a Zoom at 6:40 in the morning.
It's a lovely sight there.
I've just rolled out of bed. I'm certainly not wearing any makeup. I'm used to you being in a building site in your kitchen or in a German hotel with, you know, Wi-Fi that questions the national stereotype. It's quite the experience of being in somebody else's life, but there's nobody better to share it with.
Oh, well, there once was. He was called Jack, but we're over him.
This is my... I'm here, you know. Yeah.
I know.
Jack is actually my first marriage. This podcast started 2 years ago at this conference as a weekly where we looked ahead to the week ahead in British politics. Around our kitchen, my kitchen table, at some point after the general election was called last year, we agreed to turn it daily into this epic monster that now goes, whenever Parliament is sitting, we pop into your feeds hopefully before 8 in the morning to give you everything that you need to know. We go through everything, don't we? Right. So that you don't have to. We read the papers, listen to the bulletins, read the spins, get in touch with advisors at impossible hours in the morning, all to try and arm you for the day ahead.
Read the text saying what was wrong with what we said yesterday. Think about what we're going to do about that. And we pop up a lot, don't we? Which is since we've started to do more and more, we pop up a lot at this kind of event, and hopefully on the days when people like a really quick reaction. So after the leaders' speeches this week, and to get us into the week.
So we promise this is an interactive edition of the podcast. We do actually genuinely want to hear from you. What can we do better? What can we do more of? What questions do you have? What do you like? What would you rather change? It's an incredibly unusual audience that we have. There are mornings where you get replies from cabinet ministers within an hour of the podcast going out. One person has gone in and done a vibe analysis of whether or not we're positive, negative, or neutral about the Labour government, going back through every edition through this year. And you know, to give you an example of the kind of interactivity that we have in private with our listeners, I did a story last week, because we try and break stories on the podcast. I did a story last week about Morgan McSweeney, and I said at the start, this will probably put the cat amongst the pigeons, because the story was that Keir Starmer attempted to demote Morgan McSweeney. What happened was he put Darren Jones in number 10, and there was for a period a plan to make Morgan McSweeney report into Darren Jones. I think Morgan found out about it, went to Keir Starmer, got it overturned. And a few hours later, I got a text from a very senior cabinet minister, and it was just a cat's face and 3 pigeon emojis. And that's the kind of interaction that we get from people.
Which is tragically not broadcastable. Could you please all switch on your cameras now to see a picture of a cat? That's a great example, isn't it, of people really engaging with us very directly. And often quite sort of to expand stories that we've put out there, which is, I think, is just a really nice thing about podcasting, that the audience is closer to you, perhaps in a lot of linear radio that I've done and still do a lot, but that's a bit more, you try to figure out what interests your audience, and then you go and sort of tell it to them in this sense, with people coming back directly. But some of the names are being changed here to protect the guilty, but where I did a story about Tim Allen being appointed to Downing Street, to the easy and enviable role of the Prime Minister's chief communications person at the moment. And that was, behind the scenes, there was quite an argument about what that role should be, how would it interact with a new head of government communications, David Dinsmore, coming in from News UK, which is popular in some parts of Labour, but the Murdoch Empire not entirely popular in all parts of Labour, etc. And basically, there were all sorts of moving parts to this. And we then found that almost everybody involved had been sent the sort of transcript with the bit highlighted about them. So a bit like Sam was suggesting, we then spent the rest of the day, one morning, as just when we were sort of coming down from the caffeinated high, saying, "Oh no, I'm so pleased you heard it." No, it was really like, oh, I was hoping you wouldn't hear that bit. But that is a really nice thing, we chant our arm. We always sort of have done since did it, and I know Jack did before. It's like, it is a podcast, and you sometimes do have to sort of go out there and say things. You delight some people, you won't delight others. But we are informed, and we want to be even better informed. So any sources you've got, you're welcome. Come. We're very reliable.
Right, that's enough about us. So on with the show. And we're going to pick up some of the things that are going to dominate this week. But also what we try and do is give you intel before it's public knowledge. So one thing before we get started on the main themes of this week in conference, I've picked up that there is discussion of yet more change in number 10 and number 11. There's a big figure around here, and many of you will know who it is. That's Ben Nunn. He is Rachel Reeves' head of communications. And it looks as if after the budget, he may well now go back and work in number 10 alongside Keir Starmer. This matters because it means that Rachel Reeves probably is on course to lose one of her big allies, one of her big figures. But it's also a sort of coming home for Ben Nunn. He was Keir Starmer's first director of communications and one of the very, very few long marchers that has gone along almost the entire journey with Keir Starmer since he ran for the leadership. Ben has been by his side since Keir Starmer was in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet. So the potential there for big change, it'll leave a problem for Rachel Reeves, but something that I think Ben is mulling over at the moment. So we'll see whether that happens, but probably, I would imagine, after the budget that's coming along. So that's the kind of intel that we deliver on a hopefully as often as we can daily basis. And
can I just chip in something on that one? Because see, this is what happens. We always have an argument afterwards whether Sam splained me or I ansplained him. It depends on the day and the levels. See, some people would say on that, but some people in this room know exactly who Ben Nunn is, and others will be like, okay, yeah, I reckon that sounds interesting. There's a switch. But then, I have met people, even the hard folks, who say, why does this stuff matter? This is the kind of really more small ball stuff. But I think that is a sort of, I think that's a misunderstanding. I think one of the reasons, for instance, our playbooks are so widely read is that we understand the relationship between the small and the bigger picture. And what I make of this, I don't know if you even know whether you agree on this, because we sometimes don't, is it's a sort of an odd dynamic at the moment between, it's a one in, one out policy, isn't it, between Rachel Reeves' comms team and Keir Starmer. And my reading of that is that analytically they're trying to figure out what the problem is as to why Keir Starmer can't communicate the economic message. And at the Rachel Reeves end, there's a bit of a sense after what happened with the welfare bill, etc., that really tough time that she had and the knock that she got is she being supported enough by the number 10 machine. So I think a lot of these moves, like a very complex sort of chess configuration, are aimed at sorting out a bigger problem. So that's the real, I think, might be going on there.
No, I think that's fascinating, and I'm sure that's right. I'm going to get you in a second to sum up what you think this conference is about. Mm-hmm. But before we do that, I'm actually going to talk a little bit about our disagreements and a little bit about how we work behind the scenes. And I'm actually going to tell them the other AI story, not the one about the effect, but the
right.
Yes.
Right.
Because actually balance and fairness is important. And so actually at one point I did actually check to see, I actually ran transcripts of the podcast through AI, uploaded loads of different versions, and then I asked it, who talks more?
Who talks more sense would have been an entirely different ask.
And ChatGPT told me that I actually talked a bit more, 55% to Anne's 45%
This has
on
never
average.
been said about me anywhere else ever.
No. But then I did something incredibly dangerous. I then typed into ChatGPT, off my own back, there had not been any allegations. Are there any examples of Sam mansplaining Anne? Just to see what happens. And it, in that incredibly friendly American upbeat way, it said, "What a bold question. Thank you for asking that. That's very brave of you. The good news is that there are no examples of you classically mansplaining Anne McElvoy. However, on these 12 occasions, you either changed the subject or didn't engage with what she said or moved on too quickly or ignored her point, and here they all are. It's like, rah!
Just like now.
Anyway.
The algorithm, of course, was written by Blair, wasn't it? No, but it was a great example, wasn't it? And it then took on a life of its own, didn't it? Because we then started to find
it was making up
AI was
episodes,
starting to make up podcasts because it thought that we were quite attractive to somebody. And, but that was also, it was a bit of a learning curve about AI for me. Should we come back to what might be going on here, apart from us? What's it about? It's the Save Our Kia, isn't it? I mean, if I use the word vibe because it brings Sam out in hives, I actually believe in atmospherics perhaps a bit more, and some thought, no, this will follow, from something else, and I think it's, as always with politics, it's an art and a science, and somehow it meets in the middle. But that sense that Keir Starmer, I was really fascinated today when we've been talking about it in podcast and will in the week, I'm sure, about one, trying to move to the position where Keir Starmer could use the word racist and immoral about reform. And I think that's going to get, the version of that we're going to hear from Keir Starmer doubtless in his speech, I think will rouse the hall. I think they've been waiting to hear that. They're fed up with being in the boxing ring, back on the ropes with Nigel Farage knocking them about. They want to see a fight and they want to see Keir come out swinging. So he's taken something of a risk in doing that. Particularly, we know that there's a large chunk of Labour voters from the last election and target voters and people they want to bring back and have a conversation with, who at the same time you put the R word next to them. I think that will be really interesting how that plays out. But when you heard it at the Lib Dem conference, Sam and Zach Polanski and the Greens has a similarly hostile message. I think there was a worry that they were getting left behind. And in a way, a reform drift to the right, my belief is that because of the competition from Tommy Robinson and his even more out there English ethno-nationalists, has driven reform into some more right-wing positions on indefinite leave to remain things last week. And that now that's an opening as Team Starmer see it to have a swing. Then you really have to follow through. And we've seen Shabana Mahmood today really talking out there about deportations and deportation targets. So you could say that's a bit of a contrast or a paradox, because you've got the Prime Minister saying, you don't want to go over there because that's too horrible and racist and immoral, but at the same time, new Home Secretary who basically sets the bar of her success by talking about deportation targets.
It kind of hurts my head, really, because on the one hand, and you'll hear this from Shabana Mahmood when she stands up and speaks at a conference tomorrow, but you could read a preview of it in the interview that she gave with The Sun. I mean, if you follow the logical extension of what she's talking about, there could be 400,000 people who are served notices to leave the country and ultimately could be deported. 400,000 people. That is the policy implication of the things that Shabana Mahmood is talking about. But if you listened to Keir Starmer on the telly this morning, you would think that that was exactly the kind of thing that he was a bit chary of. He, of course, has this position that we cannot do anything that's not legal. You might think that that's fair enough as well.
Unless you change the law.
But of course, exactly
it's legal.
What Shabana Mahmood is proposing to do, by the way, which is also what Nigel Farage is planning to do, simply change the law first and make things that are currently legal illegal. And so the big essay question for the big drive, the undoubted huge focus this government will have on migration, immigration, boats, all the rest of it, is Shabana Mahmood and Keir Starmer really actually on the same page, which is how we get to ID cards.
There's an interesting question about whether Home Secretaries for Labour can really be as campaigning and performative. Shabana Mahmood, the good thing about her is she's clearly very brave, right? She really goes out there more than anyone else that we've seen, possibly except Andy Burnham, but he's not in the cabinet. But although he'd like to be running it. But I was talking to someone who'd done this job before for Labour who said there's a real problem with it for Labour. So if you're a populist Tory Home Secretary, it's sort of fundamentally, if you go, it used to be just tough on crime, now it tends to be more on the immigration and asylum things. But your base fundamentally agrees with you about that, right? And the only question is how far should you go without losing other people? So in Labour, you move quite quickly from a base of people who do want to hear that, but tend not to think of themselves as the reason they joined the Labour Party, or they're associated with it, or they go out knocking on doors for it. They're a bit apologetic about it. I think they want to get off that So I think here's my reading. I think Keir World, they think we can do that by getting stuff right and being more efficient and getting these things, expedite these deportation targets, etc. Something German colleagues in the room will know that's been a big issue in Germany for as long as we can remember, is once you set those targets, it's a bit like, I'm sorry, but how many did you actually achieve? Because it's actually just, the implementation is very hard. It was actually Westminster Insider did a very good podcast about the difficulties of implementation recently. So I think that is a potential danger. It's not so much that they don't agree with what they're trying to do. It's that the more she talks, the more she has to say. And I think what Keir Starmer wants to say is, we're getting on with it, but we're not nasty, we're not reforming, we're not doing it in a racist manner.
This feels very familiar because whenever I'm doing the podcast, I've got a coffee machine going off, I've got kids doing the breakfast. I don't have something to
there's
pour
no cat.
beer at 6:40 in the morning, but it can only be a matter of time.
You do have a very active cat, though.
Which takes us briefly to ID cards. Let me just tell you quickly about that. Of course, that's the big plan. That was the big play. It was rushed out before conference on Friday. And it's to do with stopping illegal migration and people's identity. And it is a huge move by this government that was not in the manifesto. The stakes could not be bigger. But is this another example of something that hasn't been properly thought through? You would think, given the focus on identity and migration, that this was going to be a Home Office thing. But no, it is something that's going to be overseen by lucky Liz Kendall in the technology department, the science and technology department. She has the brief of sorting that out. Why? Well, I think, quite frankly, the Home Office saw a gigantic mess coming and just passed on it. And so it has all ended up in the in tray of the new technology secretary. I asked one of Liz Kendall's aides why, in what possible universe, this kind of fairly newly created department would be up to delivering such a gigantic product. And they said, well, it's great because we've got the youngest members of staff in the whole of Whitehall. It's like, I'm not sure I wanted to hear that.
It's a bit doji, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not sure I wanted to hear that at all. And I think if there was an overarching analysis of this government, it is that the sort of tragic flaw of it was that it didn't do its homework before it got into power. But I would just raise the question whether even now in power, it's doing things, making announcements, and not properly doing the homework.
I wouldn't underestimate as well how it's in the Home Office at the high levels in terms of the people who have to deliver this and the officials, but also, of course, Yvette Cooper, who's just left the Home Office in circumstances where I think there was a fair amount of debate about her role and the way that she felt that she was doing it well. She'd got to grips, as she saw it, with a way of dealing with the small boats crisis. As she always said, it's one thing has to follow from another, and enough of all of this dotting around and just, saying stop the boats and thinking, oh God, I don't know, stop them. But I don't think she was a fan of this. In fact, she's on the record as saying that she wasn't. I think that she put up quite a fight to say this was not going to be the policy which would, if you like, flesh out the vision of the stopping of irregular migration that would benefit the... Thank you. Come again. And I think that is now, of course, she's a professional. She's one of the true and trusted professionals in the cabinet. She's moved over to the Foreign Office. Where one of her first moves was to clamp down on the use of the government jet, isn't it? Which is it's an interesting signal from a foreign secretary. She might not want to go abroad very much, but if she does, she's not going to go on the. I think there's a sort of symbolism that was going on. Anyway, the point being, I think there's a lot more disagreement with whether this policy will deliver. We should also keep an open mind on it, Sam, because we want people to come and talk to us about it. It is really hard to implement anything to do with digital ID that makes it answer the question that it seems to be aimed at, which is dealing with with the right people being able to work and claim benefits and identity fraud. At the same time as you're selling it a bit as a Brit called, like a sort of all-you-can-eat guide to to what your rights are as a Brit. It's a carrot and a stick, but it's a bit odd.
Politics is also about people. You referred to the new Home Secretary. One of the things making lots of people grumpy is that Yvette Cooper has put out this edict that people are going to be able to use government jets far less often than they were before. Now, what ministers are being told is that that's because David Lammy used a lot of private jets, a lot of the government aircraft when he was Foreign Secretary. His team say this is rubbish and that he was just doing his job, and that maybe this is just what they're telling ministers who want to use a private jet. We'll see this one play out, but what there is at the moment is definite grumpiness, and grumpiness amongst shuffled ministers, amongst departed ministers, and all of that opens up our world wonderfully because grumpy people tend to talk to us. We also always have to talk to time. My alarm will go off in 2 minutes. It's actually in the next room. I've left it because the alarm is absolutely. And so you want the last word?
I do. Yeah. Well, I mean, for now I do. You guys should have the last word. But I just couldn't resist because I was thinking about David Lammy, and I said we had a little list to sort of, we won't go into it now in 2 minutes, but let's do it on the podcast again this week. A sort of happiness meter. Who do you think's happy? Who do you think's not happy? I bumped into David Lammy the other night along with a lot of other people, so, you know, no sourcing here. But he was at the retirement party for Richard Moore, the head of MI6. And there was a kind of sense that he's starting this new world. In fact, almost everyone, Sam, who was, you know, in that penumbra, secret state, foreign office, circles around it, are in new jobs. So there's a really interesting, now I think some of these people actually are quite happy with their new moves, or at least content, or at least can put a smile on it. But I think one thing that Keir Starmer has to watch is you have, someone said to me about, would she be asked back to cabinet? She said, yeah, I could go back, but would he have my back? And I think that is a real question Keir Starmer has to face. All these people have been sort of moved around, including Lammy now, Deputy Prime Minister, high on the org chart, advising Keir on knockout blows on this, that and the other. But in the end, you know, do they feel secure? And if they don't feel a bit secure, I think with Starmer, that's often where working relationships start to go wrong. You just have that naggy way.
It's 7 o'clock. Are there any questions? If not, we will
have a drink.
Very happily have a drink. In which case... Okay, Jack.
I knew. It's a rough crowd.
Congratulations on the podcast. It's a really good idea doing an early morning podcast. I left the country at the start of the year, and at that point, Keir Starmer wasn't doing too badly. And my analysis was very simply they weren't ready for government. It's obviously a lot of water's gone on the bridge by now, and they're still doing badly. In fact, they're doing even worse. Why? Like, my analysis is now out of date. So why is it still going so badly and going worse? It can't still be because we weren't prepared in 2024.
That's like
me.
That's like me launching a new topic at 21 minutes past the podcast.
Come on,
that happens.
You used to do that all the time.
Okay, one reason is that Keir Starmer doesn't actually have a very clear idea of where he wants to go. Another reason is that Keir Starmer doesn't have people around him. Most politicians have people, long marchers, who have been on the journey for a long time and they're not there. And thirdly, Keir Starmer's go-to technique when things go wrong is to throw people under the bus. And there frankly haven't been enough buses to deal with the number of people he's had to throw under them, all of which has made a very unhappy ship. I think if the Prime Minister was more of a policy person, things would be going better. But he doesn't seem to do that or like conflict amongst those around him. He hates it when there's dialectic and argument, whereas actually, you know, convincing people, dealing with, making your mind up between two alternative choices is what politicians normally thrive on.
I like to add a light layer of culture to this political podcast. And I'm going to say Chekhov. If anyone in the room likes their Chekhov. And what are the themes that I think just is so brilliant. And when you watch a Chekhov play, you think, oh, I could plot politics onto it now, whether it's in a household in the Russian countryside in the 19th century, is people not seeing things they don't want to see, from which misfortune follows. And when we look at it as the audience, it's like, can't you see that kid's unhappy and there's a gun and that's really not a good idea. But I think that Keir Starmer didn't see a lot of things. Everything on Keir Starmer, this is a team effort. When it goes well and when things go badly, it's all the fault of the team, right? But I think in his case, a number of things. The fact that we're talking about asylum and immigration and identity cards, and that wasn't anywhere in the main, and you would have covered them inside out, Jack and Politico and other teams here, there wasn't anywhere in the pledges. It was nowhere in the missions then, wasn't it? So the fact that there was a blind spot about something which was very obvious. You saw what happened in Brexit, you've been around the country, you should have known. The blind spot then persisted in the missequencing of the first budget. Now, you have to be very, very die-hard to say that first budget was a success. Then they argue that things that weren't a success were a success, so they waste a lot of time seeing things that it's time to see. We won't always agree on what they should be, but I think what's happening now is an absolute, awakening. I think Keir Starmer probably knows some of this, and the question is, can he get that sense of clarity of vision? In which case, maybe that helps your question, for him to know what he wants, because he cannot articulate it until he knows what it is. And I'd like to think that Chekhov said that somewhere, but he probably said it a lot better.
Which means that we have bust our time limit. The alarm
Russia,
has gone
won't it?
off, and that leaves it just to both of us to say some thank yous. It is an incredible enterprise to do a morning podcast that is recorded between 6:40 and 7:05, and then appears in your feeds at 7:45. And I want to thank Evan, the producer who does it, and Paul and Laura and the vast team at Sky that make that happen. But there is a huge team at both companies that are the reason that we exist. We are here only because of Kate Day and Jamil and their trust in Jack and me a couple of years ago, backed by Jonathan Levy and David Rhodes on the Sky side a couple of years ago. And I was thrilled when I was heartbroken when Jack left, but thrilled when Anne
For a
came
bit you
along.
were.
I still am. It's a delight to see you early morning, every morning, and thank
fun,
you
don't we?
all for listening, because it is the great pleasure of my life to
Can I
do.
just add a particular thanks also to Dan Bloom and all of our Playbook and Politico colleagues. You know how much we scrape your great stories and insights, because you send a
We certainly
file
do.
at 6:01, and if it's 6:02, I'm like quite twitchy. And I think that, that sense of bringing teams together and getting the best reporting analysis and putting a podcast around it seems okay to me.
Thanks
you.
very much.